Good morning, Stein. Thanks so much. So pleased to introduce the C-level panel here at Kickstart. So we have Matt Pullen from CyrusOne, John Eland from NTT, Alex Schles from NorthC, Eric Boonstra from Iron Mountain, and Jasper Langhorst from Global Switch. I'm going to let each of you provide just a brief kind of self-introduction, and why don't we start with Matt and John and just sort of go in that order. Tell us a little bit about your role and just sort of the scope of your current operations. We're going to have a chance over the next 55 minutes to go into a lot of the detail, some of which Penny presented, talking about demand, investment flows, what you saw or from COVID, and touch on sustainability topics. There will be an opportunity through the chat interface to ask questions as well. So time permitting, I do hope to get to audience questions. But why don't I hand it over to Matt, just a brief self-introduction, and then we'll move on to the others. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for having me, and morning to everybody. So my name is Matthew Pullen. I'm an EVP at CyrusOne and Managing Director of Europe. CyrusOne's been growing quite quickly across the region. We're well known for our scale in the US, where we have approaching 50 facilities. But in Europe, we've grown from quite a small base, going back a couple of years, to a situation now where our portfolio has capacity for about 245 megawatts of IT load, spread across currently really the tier one markets of London, Paris, Frankfurt, Amsterdam, and Dublin. Obviously, aspirations to follow the hyperscale and enterprise market into the emerging gateway markets.
Fantastic. John Eland. If you could unmute yourself. John, I think we still cannot hear you. Why don't I, so John, are you there? So we'll hand it over to Alex briefly and then come back to you. Alex Schles.
Thanks, John. Good morning, everybody. My name is Alexandre Schles. I'm the CEO of NorthC. NorthC was established last year, at the beginning of last year, after the integration of the data centers of NLDC and the data center group. So we are a Dutch data center provider focusing on the regional data centers. Currently, we have 10 data centers in the Netherlands. A number of are in Amsterdam, but also in the northern and the southern regions of Amsterdam. And our focus is clearly on the regional data center services for enterprises and government institutions.
Fantastic. And just, I think everybody here is well known on the panel, but Alex, you used to work at Equinix, and before that, Telecity is the MD for the Netherlands. Matt, I think you were the COO of Xenia beforehand. And Eric Boonstra.
Thank you, John. So my name is Eric Boonstra. I think a lot of people know me as the former CEO of EvoSwitch. We sold the company in 2018 to Iron Mountain. So since then, I'm part of the Iron Mountain Data Center group. I'm the general manager for Europe. As Iron Mountain, we have a global footprint with hyperscale and retail ready data centers. In Europe, we have a base currently in London and Amsterdam, and we're expanding to Frankfurt. It feels like we are kind of a building company nowadays. So we're also expanding in Amsterdam, London, and Frankfurt at the moment, and growing fast. So more regions to come in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Jasper.
Hi, good morning, John, and good morning to our virtual audience. It's quite exciting to be on the panel. My name is Jasper Langhorst. I'm the Managing Director for Global Switch in Amsterdam. Global Switch is a leading operator, owner, and developer of large-scale neutral data centers across tier 1 markets in both Europe and Asia Pac. We've acquired large pieces of land and own that land and the property in all of those markets to provide us with sustainable growth, organic growth as well, to our existing client base and future customers. So that's basically who we are, what we're here for. And
Thank
many
you.
developments happening across our portfolio at the moment.
Great. And John Eland.
We'll try again, John. Is this working now?
Much better.
There you go. Wonderful. John Eland, I lead strategy and corporate development for NTT Global Datacenters. For those in the audience who aren't aware, so about 18 months ago, we formed NTT Limited and then had 31 different entities under that umbrella, which have now been rebranded. That included the data center affiliate businesses, including eShelter and Gyron, which will be more familiar to an audience in Europe, but also Raging Wire in the US, NetMagic in India, and NTT Com and various sub-brands within APAC. So the combined divisional portfolio has more than 160 data centers now operating under the NTT Global Data Centers brand. And obviously, we've got extensive coverage. We have the 4 regions of Americas, EMEA, APAC, and India. Primary colocation services, as you'd expect, at the colo level, but also underpinned from an infrastructure level with our IP transit network, which is extensive, covering more than 160 countries. And obviously then also we have the gateway into NTT Limited full stack services ranging from cybersecurity, intelligent workplace, network services, and hybrid cloud. So everything under one roof.
Fantastic. So I want to start off with hyperscale demand. As sort of alluded to in the last presentation, a lot of where the hyperscalers go dictates your sales pipeline, your development pipeline, and so forth. Starting with John and then Eric, maybe give us a bit of a snapshot. How active is demand? What are you seeing in terms of competitive inventory in the market? And how do companies such as yourself differentiate when trying to meet the demands of the hyperscalers?
Yeah, I think demand is strong, and we're seeing demand strong across all sectors, not just from hyperscale, but obviously hyperscale is the primary driver of the colo industry growth at the moment, probably for everybody on this panel and certainly out there in the market. So I think in our incumbent markets, we continue to see very strong absorption. If you look at somewhere like Frankfurt, I think we last stood down a construction team probably 7 years ago. So that's been a pretty strong perpetual growth story, but also into new markets. So, we have probably 16 developments now that are ongoing, which are for hyperscale, but also for our retail and enterprise client focus. So we've got strong demand in the US, in APAC. India in particular is high growth that we're seeing. And I think in terms of differentiation, it comes down to flexibility. So again, from our perspective, we offer build-to-suit solutions. We have hyperscalers that are leasing powered shells from us through to network deployments of a couple of 100 kilowatts. So the full spectrum of solutions across there, which I'm sure is the same for everybody in terms of those demand drivers.
Eric, how do you see that from Iron Mountain's perspective?
Well, I can copy, I think, 90% of what John just said. So we see increasing demand from hyperscalers. In FLAP, so Frankfurt, in Amsterdam, and London, where we are currently at, we see a lot of demand. I believe that, I think 70% of co-location take-up is from hyperscalers nowadays, and it will grow very fast. We won a couple of major deals globally in the US, in Europe last year. I think one of the main reasons is, as John also said, flexibility. So flexibility is really important. We talk to them in the early stage, even before we start building. And I think really, partnering with them and find a solution that fits both, right? And be flexible, made us, I think, a good partner for a lot of these global players.
So there's a lot going on. Many of these large customers have the balance sheets to build their own capacity. This is happening throughout, many countries in Europe. It's a global phenomenon as well. Are you seeing that mix? And I want to address this to Jasper and then Matt to get his opinion as well. But are you seeing this mix of hyperscale self-build versus lease changing in any ways that might affect the business of third-party data center operators?
Thanks, John. Yes, we do see that mix, and we all see that because we operate in the same market, right? So this is partially a battle about power and land on one end. On the other hand, it's also to keep up with the fast pace of delivering capacity in time, just in time. And COVID has been a great example of that in the first half year, when everybody starts to work from home, a lot of increased entertainment from home learning, where the hyperscalers really sort of went to market and expanded their capacity to deliver those services up to 100% of the utilization rates. Also, as what Penny said, if you take a look at the hyperscale demand and the amount of pre-lets for the coming years, that's huge. And that's a combination of build in the locations where capacity is available and look outside new markets, let's say the emerging markets, which we deem to call tier 2 markets. So, but yes, we do say that. We need to work close with them, and there's an opportunity for us as DC operators to talk with them in early stages on one end, but also to have capacity available when they need it. Yeah, so it's, let's say, the just-in-time approach. So I think as operators, we need to have capacity available. That's also why Global Switch has started sort of to speculatively build, and as you know, Global Switch hasn't done that in the past, to support the change in the market, to align with how the hyperscale market do procure the capacity in each of those markets.
Great. Matt, over to you.
Well, I think we've seen the hyperscalers look to acquire their own land and self-build in their mega clusters in Europe for some time, and that's been based on the fact that they've got fairly certain outlooks in terms of their requirements. And so you've seen that in Dublin, and you've seen that obviously in the north of the Netherlands. We have seen land banking in the established markets over the last year or two, mainly because I think of escalating land prices and the notion that the hyperscalers don't want to be caught in difficult competitive and commercial positions. So particularly in London and Frankfurt, we have finally seen them land bank. Interestingly, they've also started to land bank in some of the new gateway markets, probably because those markets are seeing, growth from very low bases. So there's not the obvious path to acquiring inventory from operators that they might have in other marketplaces. But I think we have to just be sanguine in that. Penny talked about the take-up figures, take-up representing where buildings are complete and spaces or capacity is delivered. The real situation is that as far as headline signings are concerned, 2019 saw about 200 megawatts. Last year saw 300 megawatts across the tier 1 markets, which is a 50% increase in growth. And it's tough for the entire marketplace, us and the hyperscalers, to keep up in terms of ensuring that we're delivering capacity. So that there will always be a symbiotic relationship between the hyperscalers and the operators, because we need each other, and particularly in locations where demand is not easy to predict.
So Matt, your audio is coming in and out, so maybe we can try to address that by the time I call on you next. But I appreciate that perspective, particularly on kind of the land banking and some of the frontier markets. We'll see how that develops. I want to switch over to enterprise demand and maybe sort of focus on Alex and then Eric. The main drivers that you're seeing in enterprise and traditional kind of retail colo. Any expected changes in 2021?
Yes, well, what we've seen, I think what we've seen in all enterprise markets, not only enterprise, but also healthcare and government, everybody is looking and is working on their digital transformation strategy. So how are we going to change, and how are we going to make use of the cloud in different ways? I think the whole COVID situation has probably accelerated certain decisions and the thinking about what process to follow. I think last year it has become more and more clear that being able to be flexible, having the right data to make the right decision, use data to make the right decisions has become, I would say, even more important. And that's what we've seen with in our markets, the enterprise market and the government market, is that these decisions and these discussions about taking the right decisions in this digital transformation process have been accelerated. And I think enterprises and governmental institutions have really become aware that the use of data, the whole trends of IoT and artificial intelligence has become an important part of your business. And in order to be able to make the difference and to be able to be successful in the future and sell your products and services in a different way, the use of data has become, I would say, one of the most important items on the agenda, and how to make use of these data and what kind of applications do you need in order to do this, and looking at putting everything in the cloud, making decisions about a hybrid solution. What are you going to put in a private cloud? So all these decisions and discussions have definitely been accelerated, I would say, over the past year.
Eric, I think just speaking more from a legacy EvoSwitch perspective, you could also comment on retail and enterprise demand, maybe elsewhere as well.
Yes, I can. But it's still a focus of ours, right? So we focus on hyperscale, but also on the retail market. And I see what Alex is saying. I see that as well. And everybody's talking about hyperscale nowadays, right? And hyperscale is booming and it's dominating the market. But still, 30% of the take-up last year in FLAP was retail markets. I believe that the whole colocation market globally is still 65 or 70% of the total. So it's still a very big market. And if I listen carefully to CBRE, I think that the CAGR, so the growth expectations for the retail market for the next 5 years is about 10%. So that market will be 50% bigger, more than 50% than it is it's nowadays. Not everybody wants to go in that public cloud. So there's still a lot of companies that managing their own infrastructure, that going into private clouds or hosting. So it's still a big market, and it's here to stay, I believe.
Alex, you kind of hit on some network topics, connectivity, and given just the density that you have in the Netherlands, I'm just interested in your views, and we can maybe kick it to others as well. But as you see more cloud on-ramps get created through the likes of some of the SDN players, the cloud players themselves are putting more of a presence, in a more distributed way further to the edge. There's increased fiber investment. Is data center location as important as it used to be compared to when you were back with companies such as Equinix and Telecity?
Yes, well, I think that you see that we have seen already, I think, over the past years, further development. So back at the time, and I would say like 1999, 2000, when all these capitals sort of started to develop, so that the telecommunication capitals like Amsterdam, Paris, Frankfurt, that was key for the data centers, because that was where all the networks were coming together, and that was where all the internet exchanges were located. So back then in 1999, connectivity was key, and that is still today. That hasn't been changed. But what we've seen is that these capitals remain very important connectivity hubs, and for particular companies and services and applications, it is still very important to be present and close to these real connectivity hubs. However, what we've seen is that through the technical development of network services, we've seen now that the possibility to further develop data centers outside these telco hubs and connectivity hubs is possible as well. And I think it is twofold. One hand, the technology provides you with the possibility to have data centers in the region, but still being connected to the connectivity hubs with hardly any loss on service levels. On the other side, we also see that there is still a significant part of enterprises and government and semi-government, local governments that think about the choice they have. And in the old days, there was hardly any choice. If you want to make use of a data center, you had to go to the capitals. Now that there is a choice and they can have a data center partner closer to where they're located, that what we see is that often is a preference for them. So it is both sides. It's one hand, the demand to have the possibility to have a local data center, regional data center partner, and on the other hand, technology provides you with that opportunity.
So related to that, a number of you have, whether it is in Amsterdam or Frankfurt in particular, I think one of you in London as well, hosts a node of one of the internet exchanges, whether it's Links or Day6 or M6, and then in the meantime, since these exchanges were originally developed, there are direct connect nodes from Amazon and ExpressRoute from Microsoft. And I wonder, do you see this sort of magnet effect of having one of the internet exchange nodes in your footprint compared to the magnet effect that you might have from having a direct cloud on-ramp? I'll stick with Alex, and then if any one of you wants to add to that, I'd love to get your perspectives. Maybe Jasper next.
Yeah, I think I think having the internet node is and has always been, especially in the past, has been important to be able to offer your customers this peering service. Also, the having the on-ramps of the big cloud providers is, of course, something that provides your customers, your end customers, again with the type of service that they can have, the choice between different cloud providers, but immediately from, let's say, from one location. So I do believe that is important for your end customers. On the other hand, there are still, again, what I said, there are players in the market, providers in the market that provide you also with a direct access to these cloud providers while not having directly the on-ramp in your data center. So that, again, is what I said before, because we have now the possibilities for different connectivity services, having an on-ramp in a different data center, but for instance, having a megaport to be able to connect you there is another possibility. So there are different ways to provide your end customers with the cloud services to the hyperscalers. And apart from that, of course, there's also customers who look for other cloud providers and not only the big five. So what we've seen also is that we have customers that use other private cloud providers, national cloud providers as well. So it is a combination, and the possibilities and the choices that customers have is I would say key for them.
Anybody else want to provide a perspective on that?
Yeah, I can, John. You know my background. I've worked for one of the larger internet exchanges before I joined Global Switch. So that has given me great insight on how end customers in all sorts decide which data centers to choose for. I mean, exchanges are key to exchange traffic in a very fast and cheap way. But we've also seen the rise of the direct connects straight between corporate networks into the clouds. Yeah, so direct connectivity, and therefore a connectivity platform within a data center is just a mandatory requirement. Not only exchanges, but also the transit providers are key. Yeah, and all sorts of connectivity, also the fiber providers, to extend their services to other areas to support availability zones of any capacity, but also to transform from, let's say, colo-based solutions into hybrid solutions towards moving into the cloud in this whole digital transformation process. So these are the tools we're working with today, and our customers are working with today to develop their IT strategies. And internet has been growing. I'm not sure if you're aware, but I know you've been on PC panels this week as well. Internet exchange traffic has grown over the last 12 years with about 30%. Yeah, with DKX ramps and what have you. So apart from data center capacity being taken up heavily and also pre-lets for the coming years, the internet traffic has gone through the roof. And that is supported, and therefore these nodes are key. In combination, if one of our customers land a new service in any region, the first thing they will build is a network pop. Yeah, so connectivity, as Penny was referring to, is the first step into a new market. And then on the back of that, develop your compute power, your services, and what have you. So in combination with the media platforms, but also using the content distribution networks, has shown significant growth and will be showing significant growth in the coming years.
Go ahead. I'll move on to the next topic. If anybody's motivated to respond, feel free to fold that into your next answer. I want to pivot briefly to COVID. I think it affected all of your businesses to varying degrees. I guess starting with Matt and then John, interested in just what impact you saw on demand when we were in the thick of it, and then we can kind of get to the topic of with the vaccine coming and hopefully herd immunity coming. What impact, as COVID recedes, what are the thoughts on how demand will be affected going forward? But so maybe a little bit of a backward-looking perspective, and then prospectively, assuming the situation improves, how might that affect the demand profile?
Well, it certainly didn't get in the way of demand. Some would like to say that it accelerated demand. I think one of the things we saw that was kind of quantifiable was that a lot of customers accelerated the drawdown of their option capacity, as opposed to necessarily significantly increasing, their target acquisition capacity for the year. But as I mentioned before, we saw headline signings across the tier 1 markets increase by 50% last year. I think Penny highlighted something, and it's worthy of debate, which was it was just harder to get stuff done. So there were an awful lot of headline signings in 19 and 20 where the delivery dates slipped during last year and from last year to this year because of the impact of COVID.
John, any perspectives from your side?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, it's a similar story. I certainly wouldn't say there's been any negative impact on demand, but I also wouldn't say there's been any specific new demand. I think it's brought forward a lot of demand that was already in the pipeline. Obviously, the digital transformation trends remain there. I think certain enterprises have had new experiences in the last 12 months, which may have led to some demand spikes, certainly around network services, and we've got extensive network services and IP transit businesses, so we've certainly seen the demand drivers increase there. Along with demand for consulting services around digital transformation and this sort of thing as well. But I think from the data center level, demand has been strong, and I think it will continue to be so. I think there were some early concerns about supply chain, but I think the supply chain stood up well, and I think that's been pretty consistent across the industry for all of us as well. Interestingly, one of the bigger challenges we had was more around human logistics during COVID, being able to move specialists around sites. It was a lot easier to move bits of mechanical and electrical plant than it was to move humans at the time. So, that was something that we had to deal with, as I'm sure was the same for everybody.
So to the point around labor, labor shortages, long lead time items, planning permissions, and so forth, are we already kind of, do you think the industry has adjusted appropriately where you can kind of go forward and pursue your development projects? You've dealt with the challenges, they're quantifiable, and you're back on track. I'd love to maybe get back to Matt on that, Jasper, and then John.
Yes, I think so. The unknown challenge is around permitting, where you're in the hands of local authorities, and some of the challenges in Europe were where you had statutory time limits in terms of receiving a permit from the date of application. The governments basically, gave relief on those statutory time limits. So you were really in the unknown in terms of when you were actually going to get, whether it be your building permit or your occupancy permit. And I think the customers have become really very sophisticated, and the customers demand a scenario where they're operating without risk. So the need to have your full set of permits these days is important. So that's a concern, just permitting. But I think in terms of figuring out how we move equipment around, as John said, and how we deal with social distancing, particularly when it comes to the data hall builds, where there's certain tasks that don't really sit very well with social distancing. I think the industry has done really well, and you also see that governments have really spent quite a lot of time getting to know and understand the industry, and of course giving, whether it be essential status, critical status, has really helped during COVID. Most recent example of that is Dublin, where in the first lockdown, construction on data center sites was stopped. In this latest lockdown, data centers have been exempt from that shutdown. So the governments have really been helping to enable us to get stuff done.
So where are we? This is just sort of an open question, but in terms of labor mobility, right? So during the summer, I recall being in Europe and visiting some of your, literally some of you, and noticing that one could hear, people with Irish or British accents on construction crews in places like Amsterdam or elsewhere. But as things have clearly gotten worse from a lockdown perspective, is it still the case that this is considered critical infrastructure and there is mobility as we're kind of in the depths of COVID?
There is mobility. The issue is that irrespective of your status, there's more restrictions in terms of what you do when you first enter a country. So irrespective of critical status, you're having to self-isolate for a number of days in many countries until you have a negative test after that period of self-isolation. So the resource planning has taken on a whole new dynamic, and it's ever changing, and so you just have to make sure that you're constantly keeping up with regulations and adjusting your business to meet those.
So compounding that, I want to move on to Jasper with kind of the same question. Now that we're kind of at this new normal, if there's any, whether everyone's coping appropriately, but in addition, there's so much new investment coming into both existing, FLAP-D markets, as well as in some of the emerging markets that Penny alluded to, and others. And so competition for resources as new players put new dots on the map, so to speak. Is that a factor that leads it to become more challenging to secure crews and MEP items? Jasper, and I think I'll ask John that same question.
From a development point of view, I think it is, especially in markets where there's a lot of being built. I haven't experienced that here in Amsterdam because we had our crew on site. Which are abroad or on sea have become available, good technicians, and therefore we've been able to source proper capacity people into our business. So I think it's depending on how you look at it. Development-wise, absolutely, that is challenging. Yeah.
John.
Yeah, I think it's a similar situation for us, and because of the growth we're experiencing, and this is pre-COVID as well. These challenges were there. Being able to access talent pools in data centers, especially when you start to go into emerging markets, and to access local talent with experience when something is an emerging market. And therefore, that there hasn't been a 10-year history of data center operation over there is a challenge that we all face going there anyway. So, it's much easier in the stabilized markets. I think it's easier from a development perspective because, some of those local construction and mechanical and electrical partners have been able to pivot and address some of the demand from a data center perspective, enabling a little bit more flexibility. So it's easier to drop a high-level development team onto a region and be able to work with local partners. It's a little bit more difficult when it comes to operations. And, from our perspective as well, we're a lot more hands-on with those operations as well. So it's put significant pressure, I would say, onto operations and HR, recruitment and procurement as well. But it's something that we're responding well to and managing well. I think, it depends on the market, and for different reasons. London's got a lot of competition, as has Frankfurt, but that's more because of demand growth. And so, those teams, those specialists are all in high demand from all of us. And again, when you go into the emerging markets, because there is a dearth of accessible expertise there, then, we have the same competitive issues.
Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that, if okay, if that's okay.
Please.
Yeah, I think one of the things we should do, because I think the war for talent is going on for quite some time, right? In the main regions, and it's going to be worse, right? More entrants into the European market. So I think we should be proactive and do more and work together with, for example, with schools and universities, and to develop new courses, because I think the pool where we're all fishing in is not big enough. We should increase the pool and create more talent, and it starts at school, I think. So we need to be aware that we need more people in that pool, and we need to be make schools and universities aware that they have to develop courses that serve our industry, because our industry will grow fast, as we all know. But I think there's a gap between our schools and universities and our operations.
That's an interesting perspective. I'd like to maybe pivot over to sustainability. The EU Data Center Association just put out a statement at this event. Matt, I know that's a topic that has affected CyrusOne. Your company came out with an ESG report recently, but given the greater scrutiny on sustainability and the environment specifically, can you highlight the efforts that you're taking in this area?
Sure, and we're quite active participants within the EU DCA, and they've been. If
you don't mind speaking up a little bit, you're still cutting out a little bit.
No, I'm sorry. It must be Zoom taking its revenge on me. No, we're active participants with the EU DCA, and they're just doing a wonderful job lobbying Brussels to ensure that the regulations that are coming down the pipe are sensible. Goes back to some comments I made about our industry is new and not well understood. And I've said this before, which is that it would be easy for governments to think that data centers can be put anywhere in the world and can follow sustainable energy. So in Europe, they should be in the Nordics or in the Baltics where there's plenty of wind, or in Southern Europe where there's lots of sun. And the reality is data centers follow GDP, so they have to be in urban and suburban locations. So we've got to be mindful that we've got an obligation to the planet, but we've also got to support the growth of the digital economy. I mean, it's CyrusOne, I won't dwell on it too long. We have announced a target to be carbon neutral by 2040. We'll certainly be using 100% renewable power in Europe by the end of this year. Our mission is to build DCs that are compatible with a sustainable future, to conserve water and energy through effective design, maintenance, and ops. And importantly, we aspire to be strategic partners for sustainability with our customers, and we're doing things which I'm sure everyone else on this panel is conscious of within their organisations. Things like zero waste with test projects with certain customers, etc. So it's looming large, the agenda, and we're all trying to keep up.
Yeah, I think every company's in a different part of the journey there. Jasper, from Global Switch's perspective.
Yeah, so as an industry, we all are facing these challenges, right? For the good and the bad of it. I mean, on a European level, we are a member of the European Data Center Association. On a country level, DDA, and we are supporting all those initiatives to become. We run a strategy to become climate neutral by 2030 as Global Switch. I mean, this is just how the world is changing, right? And we just need to adhere to it and contribute to it. As Matt just said, this requires dialogue with the lawmakers, let's put it that way, and proper coordination and lobbying to explain to them what our business is like and what can be done and what we can do. We are already running a lot of green energy as much as we can as an industry. We are investing in more energy efficient data centers. We do densification projects as we all do, but also equally lowering the PUE likewise. When we build newer and greener data centers. For that, and you probably know, John, last year Global Switch issued a green bond of 700 million to support that whole strategy as such. Other than that, we just need to keep or stay in dialogue what can be done at what point in time. On local level, heat distribution, but also, as I said, build more energy efficient data centers in regular. Water conservation, if you will, is such as of a new topic, right? We've been talking about PUE for 10 years now. And now WUE comes across, but we're still trying to find out what the right targets are for existing builds, new builds, developments, what have you. So it is a continuous journey, and we have to work close amongst all of us, all the important stakeholders, being government, being the data center sector. Our customers are demanding it as well, but also our shareholders. So let's say there's no escape. It's part of our journey in these times.
I want to try to fold in as many audience questions as I can, principally related to hyperscale and just sort of like what's happening with market pricing. So the kind of the corollary to Penny's market forecast is what's happening with pricing levels. Before I do that, though, I want to maybe ask about edge, and that can mean a lot of different things. It can mean a modular build. It can mean increased development in smaller emerging markets, and wanted to kind of get your perspective on that, starting with Eric. Do you see much opportunity there? Does tier 2 demand displace the tier 1 demand, or is it more kind of complementary to it?
I think it's the second one. So and everybody has his own definition, right, about edge. So I would say, you have this growth in the second tier markets. So we're talking about flat now for many years, and flat will grow very fast. So we'll be, for the next 5 years, still will be the number 4, the 1, 2, 3, 4 of the European market. But what we will see is a big growth in second tier markets. I think Penny already said, Warsaw and Zurich and Milan, Madrid, these kind of regions will grow fast. Some of them will be 2 or 3 times bigger than they are today. And I see a lot of demand I see this from hyperscale and retail market. Demand for these new markets. You see that due to restrictions in the flat markets, you see other regions develop. But you also see that we want to be closer to the customers and build smaller facilities. So you can call it edge or micro data centers, whatever. I would say smaller facilities, let's say 1 or 2 megawatts with good connectivity in the country. And also see this, for example, in Germany, where you see development of Berlin, Hamburg, Munich, these kind of cities next to Frankfurt. So it will grow fast. and it will be next to flap. Flap will grow, and second-tier markets will grow as well. So the total market will be, exploding, I think, for the next 5 years.
So I want to sort of then continue that theme as I try to fold in questions from the audience and maybe ask you to think about new markets within, whether it's Eastern Europe or smaller markets within Western Europe. Where do you see some interesting opportunities based on the demand that you're seeing from your customers? The questions that came in maybe related to that is, how do you see hyperscale rent levels go in the near future, especially with respect to new entrants arriving in Europe? Do you expect compression or stabilization? What are kind of the pricing expectations? And then I'll just kind of throw in two more, and you can feel free to address as many of these as you wish. But do hyperscalers now exclusively prefer single let, or are they considering multi-let facilities in tier one markets? Any thoughts on that would be interesting. And then interesting question about portability. So that's something that global players do benefit from, that being able to offer product across metros, sometimes across time zones. Is that a factor that plays into customers as they think about sourcing within the EU, as it has been the case in the US and elsewhere? So a lot to unpack, and each of you probably gets about 2 minutes to just kind of have at it. And any of those questions that you think are interesting to address, would love to get your perspectives. Let's start with John Eland.
Thanks, John. I'll probably speak for all of us when I say I'd like to see the hyperscale pricing trends go upwards. So I think that's probably the only comments I'll make on that one. I mean, this sort of thing is cyclical anyway, and it's all down to basic factors like supply and demand. So time to market and this sort of thing we've seen in markets such as Amsterdam because of what went on in terms of construction and capacity increases. Then obviously that has an effect onto pricing, because there is less supply that can be brought to market in a certain period. And where you've got oversupply or a lot of competition in certain markets, and you're starting to see that in Frankfurt as well, you see the different pressures there. I think Eric's point around the new markets was an interesting one. We've been in Berlin for a long time now. We're just delivering another 50 megawatts of IT load, expanding into our Berlin 2 campus there. And we've served Eastern Europe from sort of Berlin and Vienna for quite a long time. But I think for us, and for me in particular, Edge is more about proximity to end users and proximity of applications and content to those end users. So more than it being a modular technical solution. So for us, globally, we're creating a hub-spoke and edge platform, and this is about digital logistics and delivery of data supply for us.
Matt, would love to get your perspective as well.
I don't agree that pricing is driven by normal supply-demand dynamics in our market, because demand is in the hands of a very, very small number of companies whose purchasing power is enormous. And also, if new entrants don't have one or more of those few companies that drive demand, then they will be highly competitive to get the first relationships. So we are seeing pricing challenges because hyperscalers want global pricing, and there is a threshold above which they psychologically don't want to go. And as John says, in the meantime, land prices and construction prices are increasing, putting pressure on yield, and competitors are in certain places, discounting market to just get a foothold. So, it's a swamp at the moment in terms of making sure that you are, getting sensible returns to deliver the right quality of product to the customers. As far as the market goes, I think Eric was absolutely bang on in terms of his assessment of where the markets are going. And I'd just make the comment that, we're just seeing the start of exponential growth, even in the tier one markets. When you think that in London, hyperscale deployments in colo is still less than 300 megawatts. In Frankfurt, it's probably around 250. In Paris, it's only, it's sub 150. And these are all markets where individual hyperscalers have got, demand projections to 400 megawatts each over the next 3 to 4 years. So we're going to see growth in countries where hyperscalers deploy new regions. But to Eric's point, we're just going to see continued growth in all markets where regions exist. That's probably all I'd say.
Great. Jasper, Alex, and then Eric, if there's anything that you didn't address, I'll let you take us to the finish line, but over to Jasper.
Okay, what's interesting, just to catch up on what Matt just said, tier 1 markets are just there, right? Volume-based. If you take a look, close to 1 gigawatt of capacity coming online in coming few years, compared to a few hundred megawatts in the tier 2 markets, right? These markets are like existing like 100 megawatt markets. So in that regards, you will see further expansion in the tier markets, and that's where the opportunity is. But that's where also where we will be stretched from availability of resources, plant power, what have you, as initiated in this conversation by Penny. And yes, there will be price pressure, absolutely, and that will depend, as we experience, depending on availability. So supply and demand from our in some end. We've done some proper deals last year in Paris and Madrid, and these markets didn't have a lot of supply. And other markets have been slower, like Amsterdam. You can read it in the reports compared to the others. So great opportunity there. If you take a look from the discussion, I fully concur with what John just said. This is where content meets user. If you talk about the Netherlands you could see that as edge, right? But if you go more remotely, you probably deal with smaller setups in remote locations and get them properly connected to meet that demand. And that could, as an explanation, you could see as regional zones, availability zones in tier 2 markets, not only for improving capacity or speed between user and content, but also because of regulations, right? Take Zurich, for example, GDPR, data sovereignty, what have you. So there's so many elements which dictate that. It's just not one or two. Yeah.
Alex.
Yes, so I think when you look at the total data center market, I think what we've seen over the past years is that basically when we talk about the data center market, we actually, I think, should make a split between the hyperscale market and the retail market. Because the developments that we've seen in the flap and now also in tier 2 markets where the hyperscalers are taking up, of course, a lot of capacity and the growth is enormous. It's also a different mechanism, I would say, if you talk about the earlier subject on the price and the volume and the supply demand. I would really say that there, if you compare that to the retail market where we have the enterprises as end customers and government and semi-government customers, that is, I would say, a different dynamic. We all know that is also growing, as we said in the beginning of this session. But there is a different, it's a different demand. It's a different way of how we work together with customers and talking about their challenges and how they are going to further develop their digital transformation strategies. So I would say nowadays, talking about data center market, I think we talk about a retail and a hyperscale market, I would say.
Fantastic. We're basically almost into stoppage time, but Eric, I want to give you the last word.
Yeah, so I think basically everything has been said, right? So I think the main topics for the next years are sustainability, the war for talent, and the only thing I would like to add, right, is that it's mainly, I think, if you look at FLAP and all the developing markets, it's about timing and having the capacity, and you will make deals if the timing is right. You have the capacity in exactly the same month or year as your customer needs it. So I think that will mainly it, having the capacity and have the right timing, and that will give you the deals for the future. So I think everything has been said so far. So thank you.
Well, very broad-ranging discussion. I want to thank each of our C-level execs, quite a range of perspectives, and I will hand it back to Stein.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you very much, everybody on the panel. It's been very insightful, and that has been really a really cool panel. So thank you very much. Also, it's quite unbelievable that the moderator is in California and the others are all across Europe, and it's still working in a very good way. So that is the thing that we do every day. We provide the digital infrastructure so that our economy can continue.